What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my updated Dynasty wide receiver rankings, going through the top 40. Obviously, there have been some changes post NFL draft. The rookies are going to be moved around. Certain veterans had their situation change, potential competition, maybe a new quarterback coming in. So there have been some updates. Going to be splitting these guys up into different tiers. If you enjoyed the video, hit that like button, subscribe, questions, comments, drop them down below. Also, just let me know your thoughts on the rankings. Who do you think should be higher? Who do you think should be lower? But let's just dive right into it here. Not going to go super in depth on these guys in tier one. I have three wide receivers. It's Jamar Chase, Malik Nabers, Justin Jefferson. I could see maybe some people disagreeing with Nabers ahead of Jefferson. And I just think we're in this spot where Nabers is 4 years younger. He was the wide receiver 6 in points per game as a rookie. And it's not like Jefferson has like an amazing offensive situation with a locked in elite quarterback. JJ McCarthy's still kind of a question mark. He's obviously amazing, right? But so is Malik Nabers, so that's kind of the difference there. Jamar Chase, coming off a season where he averaged 23.7 points per game, has the talent, but also has the elite quarterback playing with Joe Burrow. Now, moving into tier two, this is also just a very, very tight tier. Could see these guys' order being flipped. I start off with Puka Nacua, then I have BTJ, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and then Nico Collins. I think it's pretty rare to see Puka leading this tier. And I do just think, if Puka Nacua came into the NFL, was a round one pick, people were super hyped about him, I do think he would get more respect in Dynasty and just in terms of his overall rankings. This dude last season, in his 9 full games, so he had 2 games where one he was injured week 1, and then week 9 he was ejected, I think before halftime or right after halftime. In his 9 full games, he averaged 21.8 PPR points per game. At least in the short term, he is a really solid quarterback situation with Matthew Stafford. And even post Stafford, as long as Sean McVay's there, I trust McVay to be able to get him the ball and also, potentially develop a new quarterback. It's a situation that could be, attractive for a potential veteran coming in. So Puka, he's still only 23 years old, turning 24 here soon. I think he's an absolute monster, and I think he's a great asset for Dynasty. Then I have BTJ, and I could see some people potentially, panicking after the Hunter move, maybe moving him down. I don't think I budged him at all here. Maybe I had him ahead of Puka last time, but still just neck and neck here. I don't think this is a situation where it's BTJ or Hunter, are going to be the number one and the other one's going to have their value hurt by the other. I think both these guys can be super productive in this offense. I love the Liam Cohen addition coming in. We saw what he did with the Bucs offense last year. I think this is going to be a huge help for Trevor Lawrence. Lawrence finally has 2 stud weapons. He has the coaching behind him. And then BTJ was amazing last year, especially down the stretch. So he was the wide receiver 12 in points per game as a rookie. His last 6 games, he averaged 22.9 points per game, and that was with Mac Jones at quarterback. You look at the rest of the weapons, they are just going to pepper BTJ and Travis Hunter with targets. BTJ is 22 years old, going into year 2. I think he firmly belongs here in tier 2. Then I have CeeDee Lamb, obviously a little bit older than the 2 guys I talked about, 26 years old, but he's put up 17 plus points per game in 3 straight seasons. He's peaked with a 23 plus point per game season. So we know he has that elite wide receiver 1 upside. And then also attached to a stable quarterback situation with Dak Prescott. And then, the Cowboys are just have no interest in bringing in, target competition, legit weapons, walking into the 2025 season with just very little going on at wide receiver. Then I have Amon-Ra St. Brown, just a very steady option here, 25 years old, 18 points per game in back-to-back seasons, attached to Jared Goff. I don't quite know if he has that nuclear upside like a CeeDee Lamb. Is he going to hit 23 plus points per game? And so that's why I don't have him ahead of Lamb. And then that's also why I have some of those younger guys, because I fully expect Puka, BTJ to be able to consistently deliver 17, 18, 19, potentially 20 plus points per game, year after year. And then the last guy in this tier, someone who I think is, maybe consistently ranked a little below these other guys, Nico Collins. And maybe it's because he just started producing a little bit later. He's had back-to-back huge seasons, but 17 plus points per game in 2023 and 2024. I think he was pacing to have just an insane year last year pre-injury. His 4 full games before he got hurt, he went 6 for 117, 8 for 135 and a touchdown, 4 for 86, and then 12 for 151 and a touchdown. He's attached to CJ Stroud. And then you're just comparing the ages, right? He's like half a year older than Amon-Ra. He's like pretty much the exact same age as CD Lamb. And I just don't see a big difference in like how I view him compared to those guys heading into this upcoming season. And so like there's just not going to be a huge gap for me in my dynasty rankings. And then starting off tier 3 here, going more individual at this point, I'm going to start off with Travis Hunter. Now, I understand this is going to be higher than consensus. He is my 102 in rookie drafts. He is my wide receiver 1 in this rookie class. And I think talent-wise, he has the upside to be, tier 1 potential. Like in 2-3 years from now, if you're telling me like that tier 1 is now Malik Neighbors and Travis Hunter, I would not be shocked. I do think that is the realistic upside he does have. Now, I'll just kind of, I guess, potentially like debunk or just talk through some of the arguments against Travis Hunter that I've heard. The first one, obviously, is like, him playing both ways, playing corner is going to cap his upside. And I do think that's, potentially possible. You look at certain wide receiver prospects, all of them have risk of just like not panning out, right? They're just not what you thought they were going to be. But now you potentially add in more risk of him playing corner, kind of splitting his snaps. And I guess my rebuttal to that would be, I think those risks are kind of correlated because just first off, right, the Jaguars give up a ton to get him. Just when we're looking at positional value, how these positions are paid, you're not trading up to the 102 for someone who's going to play corner and then mix in on offense. That just doesn't make sense. That's not what you would do. That's not what the Jaguars have said they're going to do, right? They say they're going to play him primarily on offense and then he'll mix in on defense. Now, if he struggles on offense, then I think that's where you're going to see more cornerback work. But if he struggles on offense, he already wasn't panning out. So I think like the risks are connected where if he's amazing at wide receiver, they're not going to be taking him off the field a ton to put him on defense. He's still going to be playing primarily at wide receiver. And then the other argument against him I have heard is that, BTJ is the number 1. He's going to be the number 2. He's going to be like a Devonta Smith type guy to A.J. Brown, like a Jordan Addison, maybe like on the high end of T. Higgins to Jamar Chase. And once again, I'm just going to go back to like, first off, BTJ like could just be better, right? He might be better now. He might be better over the next few years. But once again, from the Jaguars' perspective, they are not trading up thinking they're getting wide receiver 2 production out of Travis Hunter. Maybe they think they just have 2 studs in Hunter and BTJ, but they also might think that Hunter might be the guy to overtake Brian Thomas Jr. And once again, like I don't think they have to be cannibalizing each other. They're both going to get a ton of work. So this just comes down to me being very high on Hunter. I think some of the concerns are a little bit overblown. Is there some risk? Sure. Is BTJ a great wide receiver? Yes. Is he going to play corner? Yes. But I still think he can be super productive for fantasy. So if you're lower on him as like just a prospect, then I do get it. But I'm just not quite as concerned about like the landing spot, the cornerback stuff as some other people out there. And also the dude's just a freak, right? Like he was playing both ways in college. I'm willing to like bet on him being an outlier and like playing a ton on offense, still getting decent snaps on defense and being a productive player. Next up, I'm going to have Drake London here, 23 years old, still very young, a wide receiver 13 in points per game last season. You're hoping he is the quarterback of the future in Michael Penix. Still kind of up in the air. He did produce very well with Penix last year in 3 games, 5 for 59, 7 for 106, 10 for 187, and 2 touchdowns. So once he got even just like competent quarterback play, he was putting up solid production. I don't know if he's ever going to be peaking as like a top 5 wide receiver in points per game. Is he going to hit like a 20 plus point per game season? Not sure, but I mean, a 23-year-old wide receiver will probably be 24 when the season starts. If he can give you, back end wide receiver 1 production for the foreseeable future, you feel great about that in this range. Another guy who I think is just in a very similar spot, we have Ladd McConkey in terms of the potential production. 23 years old, had a super productive rookie season, was the wide receiver 16 in points per game. In his last 7 games, really broke out 18.7 points per game during that stretch. The Chargers did not go out and add legit wide receiver competition. Like they brought in Trey Harris, but like he's not eating into the Ladd McConkey role. If anything, it's just going to raise the ceiling of this offense. Also adding Hampton. They were super run heavy last year. The hope is that, you add some fringe weapons, right? You drafted Trey Harris, you bring in a Mike Williams, It's not going to be the same like miserable wide receiver core that we saw last year. You're hoping they let Justin Herbert go out there, sling a little bit more. But Ladd McConkey is going to command volume. He was super productive as a rookie. He's getting those valuable snaps in the slot. So I think Ladd is a great option moving forward. Then I'm going to have the second rookie wide receiver here. We have Teteroa McMillan, just turned 22 years old recently. He is my 104 in rookie drafts. He gets the great draft capital, goes top 10, 8th overall to the Panthers. I'm a believer in him as a player. He had 3 really productive seasons in college, big sophomore and junior seasons. He gets the draft capital. I like the landing spot with the Panthers. I'm a believer in Dave Canales. I also think Bryce Young, I don't think he has like a crazy high ceiling as a real life quarterback, but I think, in terms of supporting fantasy weapons, I certainly think he can be like, the point guard, just distributing the ball, feeding his weapons, and I think Tet is just going to be the clear wide receiver 1 there. And so he's in this mix with this tier of like some younger options who maybe have somewhat unproven ceilings and like Drake London, Ladd McConkey. You've got some slightly older options coming up later in this tier, but I think he belongs somewhere in here. Maybe you have him lower. Can't really make the argument for higher, but I think this is a fair spot. Then we're going to go with JSN here, 23 years old, had a rough year 1, didn't have a great start to his second NFL season, then really broke out over the last 9 games, 18.2 points per game in that stretch. He has had an insane amount of offensive turnover here. First off, they get a new offensive coordinator. They get a new quarterback going from Geno Smith to Sam Darnold. The weapons are totally different. You have DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. Those guys are gone. You bring in Cooper Kupp. I think in the short term, the fit with Cooper Kupp is a little bit clunky just because at this point in Kupp's career, I think he probably has to play in the slot, if you want to get the production out of him. I think that's the optimal spot for JSN to play also. Not that he couldn't produce elsewhere, but like if we're trying to maximize his value, I think you would want him playing in the slot. I still think he's someone who's going to be in contention as like a fringe wide receiver 1 this year and, should be in that range for the foreseeable future. After JSN, I have another guy who had a pretty disappointing rookie season. It was just this past year, Marvin Harrison Jr. He caught 62 passes for 885 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns, only 11.6 PPR points per game. And I'm noticing like in a lot of the rankings I'm seeing out there, some of the crowdsourced ADP, you're just not getting a lot of discount from that season from Marv. Like he was expected to come in. He had the great draft capital. He was a great prospect. He landed in like the NFL ready situation, right? Where he's that early pick. Typically you're going to a growth spot like Malik Neighbors where you're playing with 4 different quarterbacks. You don't have the QB of the future. Marv went to a spot with, Kyler Murray at quarterback, just like a competent overall offense, and he underwhelmed, and it seems like you're still having to really pay up for him. So I have a tough time like putting him ahead of a guy like JSN, who, had a great year 2, also had the bad year 1, but you saw him have a really strong second season. We don't know if that's going to happen here with Marv. I can't put him ahead of guys who just like, had great seasons last year in London. Ladd McConkey from the same draft class, great quarterback situation, had a fantastic rookie season. Like maybe Marv has the higher ceiling, but still some risk there. Like compared to Teteroa McMillan, am I going to take, another top 10 prospect who didn't flop in year 1? I think it's close. I think I still slightly lean Tet though. So those are my thoughts on Marv. He certainly could turn it around, but some of the issues that were there last year where he's kind of being used as like the sacrificial X, not getting a ton of these easy opportunities, I don't see that changing because I think Trey McBride is straight up better at a lot of that stuff and he got extended. So I think people are like magically expecting this like huge year 2, and I do think he'll be better, but I don't think we can just like write off, the year 1 because a lot of those issues are still, prevalent here heading into the 2025 season. Then we're starting to get into the veterans here, the last couple guys. I have T. Higgins and A.J. Brown. Higgins coming off an amazing season, wide receiver 5 at 18.5 points per game. He re-signed with the Bengals. I think like closer to his floor is like that fringe wide receiver 1 production, but now he just proved that he can log a mid-tier wide receiver 1 season. 26 years old, a year and a half younger than this next guy, A.J. Brown. And for A.J. Brown, I think talent-wise, he should be ranked a lot higher. Like in a different situation, you're probably making the case he is somewhere in tier 2, even though he's a little bit older than some of those dudes. Like say he was with the Chargers with Justin Herbert, or like on one of these teams with a great quarterback, higher volume passing attack, even though that's not the Chargers. I think he would just be a much better option. But he's had 3 seasons with the Eagles. He has put up 17.6, 17, and 16.7 points per game. And like, that's fine, right? Like, that's great production. He's going to be a back end wide receiver 1, but you're just not getting that elite high end wide receiver 1 upside. I don't see it happening with the Eagles. Like, he would have to hit majorly in the touchdown department, be so explosive, because the volume's just probably not going to be there on this run heavy team. So now age is starting to becoming a factor a little bit. Going to be 28 years old when the season starts. Still a really solid like win now option, but as an aging wide receiver without that elite upside, he's probably someone who's just going to continue to decrease in value. Then in this next tier, tier 4, I have 3 kind of younger wide receivers in Garrett Wilson, Rashee Rice, and Emeka Egbuka. I'm having a tough time figuring out what to do with Garrett Wilson because I think he has, like, in a different situation, the upside to be ranked much higher. He's had some kind of growth situations, especially his first 2 seasons. Last year was a little bit better, but he still managed to put up 1,000+ receiving yards in all 3 seasons. But you look at his current situation, he still doesn't have a quarterback answer. Like, Justin Fields is there. As a Bears fan, like, I like rooting for Justin Fields, but I can't really paint like a super optimistic picture about Garrett Wilson's, like, fantasy outlook in this upcoming season. And then even after that, there's no guarantee they have an answer at the quarterback position. And so he's 24 now. He's going to be 25 during the season. And if he has another year where it's like, oh, the quarterback play is not great, he's commanding volume, but he's not really producing a ton with it, like, what are the conversations we're going to be having here? And it just sucks because, the last few years it's been, all right, he just needs a quarterback. He just needs a quarterback. At some point, like, you're getting up there and it's like, man, if he just never gets the quarterback, it's going to be tough for fantasy. So that's kind of the dilemma I'm at here with a guy like Garrett Wilson. And then I think there's also just like, he's a very good player, but there are certain guys who are at that next level where even in a bad situation with bad quarterback play, they're able to turn that volume into elite production. You look at a guy like Malik Neighbors, who had awful quarterback play last year. They were peppering him with volume, and he was still able to be the wide receiver 6 in points per game. So even if he does get that quarterback, I don't think he's going to be giving you that like true mid to high end wide receiver 1 production, which is kind of holding me back from ranking him lower. Then the other guy here, Rashee Rice, someone who I considered ranking both higher and lower than where I have him right now. Had the season-ending injury last year. From everything I've seen from, the Twitter doctors out there, the recovery looks to be going very well, that he should be ready for week 1. And the dude was an absolute monster last season. In his 3 healthy games, he went 7 for 103, 5 for 75 and a touchdown, and then 12 for 110 and a touchdown. He has the upside to be the wide receiver 1 attached to Patrick Mahomes. One concern is that he still might have a suspension looming. I mean, this was something we were talking about, like potentially dinging his value last offseason. Then he just kept rising and rising and rising because we were never getting that suspension news. That still could be out there. And then I think he's also just in an interesting spot because I think he's someone who's really benefited from the role they've kind of cultivated for him in this offense, where if you just threw him in any random system, I don't think he would have anywhere close to the same success. And then you have some guys with maybe some overlapping skill sets where Xavier Worthy was really breaking out last year, getting a lot of these manufactured touches, especially near the red zone. I'm not saying Jalen Royals is going to come in and like take over or anything, but like Royals, from what I've seen, has a very similar skill set to Rashee Rice, where it's like if you were going to design a role for Jalen Royals, it would be what Rashee Rice did last year. And so you're kind of betting not even necessarily on the talent of the player, you're betting on the team to use him in the same way they did last year. And he was productive, so they very well might. But if they start distributing those opportunities to a few different dudes, then you're kind of running into some trouble. So could see the argument for higher, could also see the argument for lower. And then the other guy in this tier, Emeka Egbuka, very high on him as a prospect, just seems like a very safe, high floor option. Had great production in college with a lot of target competition, NFL caliber wide receivers, guys who are going to be studs in the NFL or already are. And I think some people are cooling off on him because of the landing spot to the Bucs. And I could see why, maybe this isn't the best, especially in the short term. There's a chance where Evans and Godwin fully healthy week 1. Egbuka is like the number 3 on the depth chart in terms of targets. And that's not great. You get drafted round 1, you're ideally stepping into a situation where you can produce right away. But that's like, one specific outcome. There's also a possibility Godwin's not ready week 1, coming back from that ankle injury, and Igbuka starting in the slot week 1, getting to produce, getting, to ball out right away. Mike Evans, 32 years old, suffered an injury last year, only going to get more and more likely that he's kind of banged up, getting older. He also could potentially fall off at literally any point. So then I'm just looking at the offense. Baker Mayfield at quarterback. This team has wanted to pass the ball, high volume passing attacks. There are a lot of ways where this goes right for Emeka Egbuka. And, on the way it goes wrong, where both guys stay healthy, both guys have amazing seasons, I'm still a believer in him, the next season, the year after, once he's really getting to emerge within this offense. Now, moving into tier 5, I'm going to start off with Rome Odunze. I think he's a really interesting player to evaluate for Dynasty because I could see him really tanking in value after the season. I could also see him like really growing in value and being a super, solid pick where he'd be right now. I think of like the former Bears weapons when you're looking at DJ Moore, Cole Kmet, like everyone here got more competition in the draft, right? Bringing in Luther Burden, bringing in Colston Loveland. I would say I'm least concerned about Rome Odunze and like his potential role because I just don't think anyone's competing with him as playing like as an outside wide receiver. Like I think he's just the best at it when you're looking at their current personnel. I'm still concerned about just him as a player though. So like I think his skill set is fine with the competition they brought in, but he still had a bad year 1. And you can say, he wasn't utilized optimally, which I think is fair, but 54 receptions, 734 yards, 3 touchdowns. It's not great. Now he was a solid prospect, right? He went top 10 for a reason, was pretty consensus there, in mock drafts from NFL teams. But I still feel like the floor could fall out where he's kind of getting grace for a bad coaching situation last year, also getting bumped up a little bit because you have, Ben Johnson coming in. People are now believers in this offense. But if it doesn't happen in year 2, there's a pretty steep fall off where the floor could just really fall out on him here. So could see him increasing in value, could also see him potentially falling off. Then I have Xavier Worthy up next. Was underwhelming for most of his rookie season, especially, the opportunity with Rashee Rice getting hurt. Thought he would kind of break out earlier than he did, but he closed the season very well. The last 3 games, put up 19.6, 20.5, and 22.9 PPR points. In the playoffs, he went 5 for 45, 6 for 85 and a touchdown. And then the Super Bowl, obviously I know some of it was garbage time, 8 for 157 and 2 touchdowns. I think it'll be very interesting to see how the Chiefs use Worthy and Rashee Rice. Like I talked about with Rice, do they just give him that same role he had last year? Do they mix Worthy in? Like, how are they dispersing these touches, the usage? It's very interesting to see. I would still give, Rashee Rice the slight edge because he was just more dominant in that role last year early on. But there's still some real upside here with Worthy. He's only 22 years old. And like week 1, we see him, working in the slot, getting those, end arounds, the quick looks, works near the goal line. Like, his value could really skyrocket just within a few weeks of the start of the season. And then more guys in this tier. I think these guys are pretty consistently clumped together when you're looking at Dynasty rankings. I have Chris Olave, Jordan Addison, Devonta Smith, Zay Flowers, and Jalen Waddle. I think Chris Olave stands out a little bit from this group just because I think he's a much different bet, where a lot of these other dudes are like wide receiver 2s, don't have a ton of upside. I think Chris Olave has real upside. He just has the major concussion concerns where in like bad situations, year 1, year 2, 13.2, 14.5 PPR points per game, he was on track to like take this potential year 3 leap. He's never had good quarterback play, still been a solid option, but he has had 4 concussions in the NFL. He had 1 at Ohio State, and like he's getting like knocked out cold on the field, which is always awful to see. And so he's just this weird bet where he could be really good. If he never gets a concussion again, he will be an absolute smash at his current value. It's also possible he takes 1 or 2 more big hits and, all of a sudden he's out of the league. So it's a pretty high like risk reward bet you're taking there. The rest of these dudes like Jordan Addison, wide receiver 30 as a rookie, 22 in year 2, capped ceiling, peaking as a wide receiver 2, playing with Jefferson. Devonta Smith, a little bit of a higher ceiling. He has been the wide receiver 14, 20, and 15 in points per game. But once again, capped ceiling, run-heavy offense, playing behind A.J. Brown. And then Zay Flowers doesn't have like a clear wide receiver one ahead of him, but still a lower volume passing attack. In his 2 seasons, he's put up 12.3 and 12.9 PPR points per game, mid-tier wide receiver 3 numbers. There have been these stretches where he has these big games. I remember last year, it was like half of his games to a certain point, maybe like week 12, week 13, it was like half of his games were like 18, 17 plus points. And then the other half were like under 7. Like he was completely boom or bust. So I do think there's some upside for him to, break into that wide receiver 2 range for fantasy, but still tough to see him being like a, true wide receiver 1 fantasy option. And then Jalen Waddle, very interesting situation here because probably heading into this past season, I would have had him just probably behind Olave in this tier, where he had 3 very productive seasons, 15.4, 15.3, 14.2 points per game. And he was in this spot where like Tyreek Hill's aging. You could potentially see him like getting more and more work, being like the, heir apparent once Tyreek Hill is gone. Then in 2024, just an awful season, 10 points per game. He was pretty much like phased out of the offense. You had Jonnu Smith and Devon Achane more involved as pass catchers. But it's like the first 3 seasons are still there. He was super productive. So I feel like I have to bank on a bounce back here. And then you also have the Tyreek Hill stuff where he, potentially could be traded, moved, and then all of a sudden Jalen Waddle is in like an ideal situation. And then the last guy in tier 5, I have DK Metcalf. Probably going to be lower on consensus or lower than consensus on DK. Gets traded to the Steelers. They still haven't signed Aaron Rodgers. I guess for this video, we'll assume there's like a, 80, 90% chance that happens, just the way they approach the draft. Like they did not approach that draft thinking that they wouldn't have, Aaron Rodgers coming in, being their quarterback 1 this year. And you look at DK Metcalf, 2020, his second year in the NFL, averaged 17 points per game, was the wide receiver 10. So at that point, right, you got like this big, super athletic wide receiver, was just a top 10 option in points per game. You're thinking his career is just going to skyrocket. He's just going to deliver those wide receiver 1 seasons, year after year. And that just hasn't happened. Since then, he has put up 14.4, 13.3, 14.1, and 12.8 points per game. His best point per game season is the wide receiver 20. He's 27 years old. I don't think this is some sort of like great offensive environment. The offense was obviously terrible last year. You have some upgrades. Metcalf himself is an upgrade, potential quarterback upgrade, but this is still a team that I think is going to want to run the ball. Arthur Smith offenses have never been high volume passing attacks, even when he's had weapons like Drake London, A.J. Brown. It's always the volume that's kind of killing those dudes. And so I just don't have a ton of optimism here with Metcalf. Like maybe he has a good season with Rodgers, but then even after that, the quarterback situation is up in the air. I just don't love the landing spot. I think he's someone who's just been like consistently overvalued for fantasy football. Now moving into tier 6, I'm going to start this tier off with Luther Burden, and I'm actually going to combine these next 2 players because they're kind of intertwined here. I have DJ Moore right after Burden. Now you guys might have been thinking like, where's Moore? Should have been in tier 5, maybe tier 4. And I do think these guys are very, connected, as I mentioned. I think the Bears landing spot here for Luther Burden, it's fun because he goes to a crowded wide receiver room, which some people seem to be burying him for, but he has like real upside to dominate in the slot in this offense. I'm not saying he's Amon-Ra St. Brown, but you look at the work that Amon-Ra St. Brown was able to do in that Ben Johnson offense. It's tough to not see the ceiling here with Luther Burden. We have also seen Ben Johnson kind of taking some shots at DJ Moore, talking about how his wide receivers need to block. They can't be giving up on routes if they're not the primary read. When he says these things, these are like direct shots at DJ Moore and what he put on tape last year. Like he would give up on routes. Obviously, he was not blocking to the best of his abilities. And Luther Burden is a Ben Johnson guy. He is someone that, this new regime, the new coaching staff liked, drafted. I don't think it's crazy that Luther Burden could, be more involved than people are thinking here in year 1. And now I'm not like anti-DJ Moore. I thought before the draft, like this was an amazing situation here where he's a top 2 wide receiver. He could get work in the slot with Ben Johnson. But I went from thinking he could be a potential, wide receiver 1 for fantasy to thinking it's probably more likely he's a wide receiver 3 and finishes outside the top 24. Now, it's very possible that Burden kind of needs a runway where he's not super involved early on and then could kind of, overtake this situation later on. But like the ceiling comp for Luther Burden has been DJ Moore. And I trust the way that Ben Johnson is going to utilize these guys. And Luther Burden's 21, DJ Moore's 28. So even if it's like a redshirt season for him, which I don't really think it's going to be, like, do I want DJ Moore right now for a couple more seasons, and then who knows what happens with his contract, if he's still with the Bears, traded, whatever? Or do I want, Luther Burden, who has that upside and is 7 years younger than him? So I do understand, like, just evaluating this Bears situation, I'm probably more favorable to Burden than consensus, and, probably more anti-DJ Moore than consensus. But, like, the shots that Ben Johnson has been throwing out are real, and he's the new head coach, and he's bringing in Luther Burden. I think it's tough to not, feel optimistic about Burden, and also tough to not feel a little bit concerned about DJ Moore's outlook heading into the season. Then we have another rookie in Matthew Golden, goes round 1 to the Packers. Admittedly, like, I just wasn't super high on Matthew Golden as a prospect. Super weak statistical profile for a round 1 wide receiver. He goes to a crowded wide receiver room, but a wide receiver room that doesn't have a number 1 wide receiver and does kind of need one. It seems clear they're, throwing all these darts at the wide receiver position. Some of the concerns, though, Matt LaFleur does like to rotate his wide receivers, where pretty much with the exception of Romeo Doubs, like, everyone is logging sub 75% route participation, which, for fantasy can be pretty frustrating. And then I'm also just not super confident that he emerges as like a super high ceiling fantasy option. Like, if you're looking at the Packers wide receiver room and you're thinking that Golden is going to come in and, be their alpha wide receiver 1, an amazing option, I just can't really get there. I think he could be productive. I think he could be a good NFL player, but I don't see him as like this guy that's going to rise way above, the rest of the dudes in that room. Continuing on with this tier, I have a couple more younger wide receivers. George Pickens, 24 years old, couple seasons, 12.3, 11.7 points per game, back end wide receiver 3 both years. Got to say, the fit with Metcalf doesn't seem great, especially with questions at the quarterback position. It does seem like Pickens has some sort of like, untapped ceiling here for fantasy, but he also hasn't proven that he can command volume at a high level. He's going to have a few amazing plays every season. He's going to have those boom games where he catches, a 50, 60-yard touchdown, but the consistency hasn't really been there, and his short-term situation is certainly not ideal. Then we have Jameson Williams. Year 3 breakout season in 2024, was the wide receiver 23 in points per game at over 14 fantasy points per game for PPR. He was super efficient. He was 5th in yards per target, 6th in yards per reception. I think the concerns here for JMO are just his like ultimate peak. Is he ever going to be able to command a lot of volume? Is he going to be more than just like a boom bust wide receiver who really needs to hit in like efficiency and touchdowns? Because like, if he just doesn't hit on a few of those big plays, like, it's just a tough break for fantasy. So I do think he could be in like this fringe wide receiver 2 range, but does he really have that upside to be not even a wide receiver 1? Because I think that's, that's like, a way ceiling outcome that I don't think he's going to get to. But like, can he be a mid-tier wide receiver 2? Can he get to 15? Can he hit a 16 point per game season? I think, there are questions there. Are the Lions going to commit to him long-term? I think that's also a conversation. So he is going to close out this tier. And then starting off tier 7, someone who I know I'm going to be higher on than consensus, I have Josh Downs here. He's only 23 years old. In year 2, averaged 13.1 PPR points per game, was the wide receiver 28. He had the 6th highest target rate in the NFL. And this is playing on, a bad offense with bad quarterback play. He's still producing like a higher end wide receiver 3 and commanding targets. Now, obviously the short term is not great because, is it Richardson? Is it Daniel Jones? At this point, tough to see either of those dudes as like long-term answers, but he's still very young. Like, there's some time for the Colts to kind of figure this thing out. I also think the addition of Tyler Warren is going to help him out, because some of the things that were hurting Josh Downs down the stretch was that they were not running a ton of 3 wide receiver sets, and he was not someone who was in on those 2 wide receiver sets. I think having Tyler Warren, who can be a threat, as a pass catcher, but can also stay into block, I think that can open up the amount of 11 personnel that the Colts throw out there. And I think that's obviously going to help Josh Downs if he is the wide receiver 3 there. So just a fun, young player who I'm interested in here. Then getting into some more veteran options, Brandon Ayuk, still only 27 years old, coming off a torn ACL. Obviously, you don't know what we're going to be getting out of him this year, but His past production is solid. He's had 3 wide receiver 2 finishes in points per game at 15.4, 13.4, and 15.6 points per game. The 49ers didn't add any weapons in this draft. It seems like they're going to be in a pretty tough spot with their cap situation moving forward, especially if they extend Brock Purdy. So it's tough to see them like really spending elite capital at the wide receiver position, whether that's in free agency or in the draft. So if he can get back to the form he was at prior to last season, I think he's a pretty fun fantasy option. Then I'm going to go with Terry McLaurin, definitely getting up there in age a little bit. 29 years old, will turn 30, I believe, during the 2025 NFL season. I think some people have maybe gotten a little bit over their skis on Terry. He had a career year, 15.8 points per game, was the wide receiver 14, but he also hit in a lot of areas. He really hit in the touchdown department. He was top 10 in deep targets, air yards, air yard share. He was 3rd in quarterback rating per target. So like he was commanding volume. He was getting into the end zone. He was getting deep targets. He was a great, option to be targeted by Jaden Daniels. I just don't know how much room there is to grow on that 15.8 points per game. I still think this is going to be a pretty run heavy team. Is he going to consistently hit in the touchdown department again? And I'm not saying he couldn't, finish as like a back end wide receiver 1, but say he's once again like a higher end wide receiver 2, then heading into next year, you're looking at a guy who's going to be 31 years old. The age is starting to become concerning. And you look at a guy like Brandon Ayuk, who I think is pretty consistently ranked after him. It would not shock me that once Ayuk got healthy, that he could not deliver pretty similar production, in this 49ers offense. And then just some of the guys ranked behind him are just younger options that I think are going to have, a longer runway to produce. One of those dudes is Jerry Jeudy, who is 26, coming off a season where he caught 90 passes for over 1,200 yards, only 4 touchdowns, but wasn't playing on a great offense. He was top 6 in receiving yards at the wide receiver position. Now, the splits with and without Jameis were pretty extreme. He averaged over 21 points per game with Jameis, under 10 without him. But you're also kind of just playing with 2 extremes where Jameis is going to go out there. He's going to absolutely sling it. You're going to rack up a ton of volume. And then without Jameis, the quarterback play was just absolutely abysmal. So it's not shocking that he was way more productive with Jameis, but potentially concerning, especially because the quarterback situation isn't solved this year. But he still has another season, 2022, where he was a top 20 wide receiver in points per game. So it's not like he only has been productive in his career with Jameis Winston. Still had another really strong season. Now, he's going to be the clear wide receiver 1 here, but this quarterback room, like I mentioned, is all over the place. It's pretty much a circus at this point. You have Shadur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel from this year's draft class. You have a veteran in Joe Flacco. You have Kenny Pickett, who, pre-draft potentially could have been the starter. Now, I don't even know if he's going to be on the roster. And then you have Deshaun Watson, who, I don't think he's going to play this year, but still going to be involved potentially. So a lot going on for Jeudy. He's kind of reaching, an age at 26 where you don't know if he's ever going to get that elite quarterback play, but could still be productive as like a fringe wide receiver 2. And then I have Jaden Higgins, another rookie here. He goes early round 2 to the Texans, which is a really fun landing spot. Obviously paired with CJ Stroud, a passing attack you expect to be productive. I also like the fit because you have Nico Collins there to already play the X wide receiver. Jaden Higgins does not have to do that. I think that could have been a tough spot for him if he kind of got locked into that spot just due to his size, his athleticism. Don't think that's the way you use him most optimally. So I think it's a fun landing spot. He's an interesting prospect. Gonna, be towards the end here of tier 7. And then the rest of these dudes, I think we're actually going 41 deep, but it's just going to be veterans. So Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans. Tyreek Hill and Evans are 31. Adams is 32. Chris Godwin, 29, but coming off an injury. And so like Tyreek Hill, disappointing 2024. You could see a bounce back, but if he doesn't bounce back, the value is pretty much going to tank. Devontae Adams, I think, is a really interesting option, like specifically for the 2025 season. Going to the Rams, it's a fun landing spot, but once again, could just fall off at any point. Chris Godwin, had an amazing start to last year before he got hurt. We're just hoping he gets healthy back into this offense. And then Mike Evans just continues to give you 1,000-yard seasons. But once again, you just don't know when the fall off is going to happen. So that is going to wrap it up for my top 40/top 41. Just combine those 2 Bucs wide receivers. But let me know your thoughts. Who's too high? Who's too low? If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.